Good afternoon. Welcome back to the event space. You are tuned into hard drives, NASs, and raids. Oh my. With the photo managers. David, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have you on. And me personally, the only reason I haven't had a NAS crash on me is because I've never owned a NAS. But hard drives check, raids check. I've been through the ringer with this. So I will, for one, will definitely be tuned in. If you guys out there have any questions, joining us on YouTube, feel free to get them into the comment section. David, I'll turn it over to you and I'll see you in a bit for the Q&A.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. I appreciate it. Let me juggle a screen or two around here and get started with my sharing. Stand by for one moment. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my presentation. Again, thanks for B&H for having me here. My name is David Erickson. I am with the Photo Managers. We're an international professional organization that brings together people who work in this huge area of managing digital photography and all the assets and all the software and all the different particular things. We have a huge diverse membership, people who've accidentally fallen into the profession or others who are very intentional about the work. Me, myself, one of the things that I like to focus on is helping my clients. I work with a lot of private clients and a few businesses, and I mostly work on solving technology issues. So a lot of times I'm teaching software, mostly Lightroom Classic. I'm doing a lot of hard drive and backup systems work. I'm even installing operating systems and doing a bunch of that kind of stuff. So for me, it's pretty much digital photography, software and hardware. Those are the Venn diagrams that sort of overlay my world. But yeah, I love doing the work that I do because I get to work with so many different interesting people, and I get to help solve problems. And as a photographer myself, I've been a freelance photojournalist. I've been a professional photographer. I've done a lot of different things. One of the things that I just always come back to is helping people navigate and solve technology issues. And I love photography, so it's a perfect kind of thing. And Photo Managers is a great organization to be part of, great community. So anyway, today we're going to be talking about hard drives and some of the concepts behind what makes for a robust and safe and secure data storage setup for photography. That's a big area. And what my aim is to give you some sense of what are some of the things that you need to think about when you're looking at buying storage solutions or managing your storage solutions. So to start off, we're going to talk about some key concepts and some things that we need to keep in the back of our mind as we're evaluating and thinking about purchasing or running different storage solutions. And then we're going to talk a little bit about different hard drive types, their pros and their cons. We're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of connections, what a NAS is versus a DAS, which is not a RAID. We'll get into all of that. Definitely talk about what RAID systems are. I've got a few cautionary tales for you, and then I've got a whole bunch of real world examples because I think it's really instructive to see how some of my clients have we set up for them specifically given their individual circumstances. What I'm not going to mention or discuss are really about connection speeds. I've got a mention of it, but I don't want to get into it because it gets really complex. We're not going to talk about backup strategies specifically. I'm going to reference the 3-2-1 model, but we're not going to go into that per se, nor am I really going to get into hard drive formatting, like what are the different types of formats, APFS versus HFS, et cetera. So really this outline is designed to give you some of the critical thinking skills that you need when you're evaluating and thinking about purchasing your systems, and then just some key concepts or hardware specific so that as you're actually looking at things, you've got the right questions to ask and you can sort of think about, do I really need this versus that? Okay, so let's get started. Let's talk about some key concepts. And these are some concepts that I just want you to put into the back of your brain. And again, just to help you think about and evaluate the things that we're going to be talking about, especially if you're going out to be doing any purchasing or organizing your systems. And These are, I'm going to talk a bunch, and you don't need to take down notes per se. Just sort of allow this information to just sort of wash into your brain. So the first thing we want to think about is function and purpose. So storage of any kind is simply a tool, right? And the tools that we use, some of them are more capable than others. And so to evaluate a tool and to use it properly, you want to think about what is your goal or your purpose for that tool. So is this hard drive for yourself, for your own personal setup, or is it for a business? Are you working with a business and helping them, or are you part of a business making the decision? Is this for a client? Is this somebody that you're working with and you're supporting them? And what are their needs? Not only do you want to think about your current needs, like what do we got going on right now, but what does the future look like? What is the potential growth of the business? Or you as a photographer, what are you doing as you're developing? Oh, I'm about ready to get into Hasselblad esque cameras, with digital backs and all of that kind of stuff. That's a whole different realm of storage solutions that you're going to need from having a nice little point and shoot. Are you working with a standalone computer, or are you working with a group of people who need to access multiple files all at the same time in a network? And are you looking at short or long-term storage solutions? Do you need something just to shuttle back and forth between a couple of computers, or do you need something that's going to last you for a good deal of time? Okay, so that's function and purpose. So we really want to think about what is this doing and why are we doing it? The next set of criteria you want to think about, which are related, obviously, is performance and redundancy. So when we're working with a lot of data, that's one of the things that we deal with digital photography is film is cheap, as they say these days in digital photography. Spray and pray, right? You can come back from a trip or an event with 3, 4, 5,000 photos because digital cameras. So if you're working with a lot of data, performance can be a really important aspect of what you're choosing. And then you want to think about, well, what's inside this device that is I'm going to be connecting up, and what's going on inside of the unit? Is it a spinning platter, or is it a bunch of chips? Does speed of access really matter that much? Are there mobility or size considerations that you need to take into account for it? Am I shuttling between two locations, or am I just locked into one place and so I can get something that's big and heavy and just sit there on the desk? Do I need to stream the data? Do other people outside of my location need to access some of the things that I'm working on? We also want to think about the data on the drive itself, and we want to relate to this object as a physical, mechanical thing in the world. So what happens if the drive goes bad, gets lost, stolen, or damaged? How important is it to have additional copies? And where are those copies going to be stored, and how are they going to get made? So again, just broader questions that we're thinking about. And the last set of, a little pair that we want to think about is scalability and accessibility. As our technology grows, so do our data storage needs. I mean, we've gone from cameras that were, a megabyte, to now, cameras with 100 megabit sensors. And these files are getting pretty huge. Hopefully we're at a balance point, because I don't think the human eye can see much more than what we're being given. Is this a client project? So does somebody else need to access it? The iPhones, like how are we bringing in our Android and iPhone or smartphone photos, right? So how are those going to access the system? And then if we start adding in a bunch of that data, how is that going to affect how much data storage we have available on our computer? We also have to think about technology. It's ever evolving. Thunderbolt 4, USB 4, Thunderbolt 5 is on the way. How do I connect to this? I have devices that I can barely connect to nowadays. What's coming in the future? So I want to think about accessibility. And where is this hard drive going to go when it reaches the end of its life? And how am I going to get the data across and onto something else? So we have to think about sort of the size and how we're going to be accessing the data over time. Anybody remember zip drives? That's I think, a relevant question when it comes to data accessibility and technologies that phase out. And that's one of the things that we do with the photo managers, is that we're dealing with accessibility issues all the time. So, there's people out there that still have these and can connect to them. All right. The last thing I want to leave you with all of this, background thoughts before we get into some real specifics is, when you're working with technology, oftentimes it's the forever compromise. Cheap, fast, or good, and you can only pick two of them. There's always going to be something that you can't quite achieve with the devices and the products that are out there. So you're going to use those three sets of concepts that I talked about: function and purpose, performance and redundancy, and scalability and accessibility, to help you navigate this conundrum. What's the best of the options that I can get, knowing that at some point I'm probably not going to get all the things that I'm going to really want. So how am I going to evaluate and make my choices? All right, so let's start talking some practicalities about hard drives, the modern hard drive landscape that we're looking at. And right now, for most of us consumers, we have choices between two dominant technologies: what we call HDDs, or hard disk drives, and SSDs, or solid state drives. And if you look on the picture that we have here, the older technology of hard disk drives, we have a spinning platter, kind of like a record player, with an armature that swings back and forth and is controlled by the computer. And it literally reads the data as the platter is spinning around. And so whenever you hear a drive and you hear that little clicking or grinding sound, that oftentimes, well, you don't want grinding, it would be a bad sound, but a lot of times you hear whirring and clicking. That is the read-write head moving across the platters. And we could have multiple platters stacked up on there, and it's reading all the little ones and zeros that are literally in little pockets or little pits that has been written onto the drive. Our newer hard drives, our solid state drives, are literally just chips, and they are there's no mechanical parts. And I'm going to talk about SSDs here in a little bit, but you can see we can get some size differences and a lot of other performance differences between these two form factors and these two technologies. So let's talk a little bit about the pros and cons of hard disk drives. The pros are they're cheap. The technology has been around a long time. We've really taken advantage of the ability to miniaturize and scale and build up manufacturing around the world. So they're very inexpensive. You can buy a 4 terabyte hard drive for under $100 these days. They have large capacities. They can go up to 15, 18, I think, terabytes. So you can get some really big ones. And they have a very long lifespan. We've had hard drives, these kinds of hard drives, around for years, and we really understand the kinds of conditions and the kinds of wear and tear on them. And so we understand, and they're built to last. They're really built to be around. Interestingly enough, I learned this in my research. The newer ones, at least, are very energy efficient, and they've really been able to make them, you would think that they would require a lot more because they're spinning things, but they've actually developed a lot of really great technology that makes them, in some cases, more energy efficient than the SSDs. Some cons for hard disk drives: they're slower because there's a mechanical aspect where the read-write head has to, physically move from point to point. They are prone to mechanical failure, right? Because there's actual mechanical devices in there. They can, if they get dropped or stepped on, you can actually bend or break the parts in there. Or, if they get ejected unexpectedly, sometimes that can cause problems. And often they are noisy and they're hot because there's a physical thing going on here. They're spinning, they're generating electricity, and they can be a little bit noisy, especially older drives. And that can be bothersome in a working environment. Some folks like to have their offices really quiet. And if you got a big fan making a lot of noise, it can be a little bit distracting. So some pros and cons of SSDs. They're fast and they're quiet. There's no mechanical parts, and so the electrons can move around a lot quicker. And because there's nothing moving, there's nothing to make a mechanical sound. So they're really nice in that regard. They can be very small and very lightweight, again, because we don't have mechanical objects moving around. And they're very reliable. They are still a newer technology, and so we have yet to see a long lifespan. What happens over time with these? But they're generally very reliable. We don't have to worry about a lot of mechanical failures with them, and they seem to work really well. Some of the cons, they're expensive. SSD prices are still not down where they're competitive against the HDDs. However, there's a few notable exceptions in certain products out there that are becoming more affordable. Samsung has a great 4 terabyte SSD. I'm not plugging B&H. They're not giving me for anything for this plug, but they have a great Samsung 4 terabyte SSD for just under $300. That's an amazing price. Otherwise, you're usually paying around $500 for anything of that size. So the price is still up there. They're coming down, but it's just taken a while for them to get there. Like I said, we're not sure about the lifespan. We haven't had these around for 15 or 20 years, so we don't know yet. There's some question about how many times can you read and write data to these chips before these chips start to degrade. You go out on the internet and you get a lot of different opinions about what's really going on there, right? Hey, the internet's going to internet. There is some concern, some people have expressed concern about what's called bit rot, where the little bits of data get accidentally flipped for whatever electromagnetic reasons. And that can, cause some problems. These are things that if you go out and search, you'll find information about them. But by and large, it's still a big question, like how serious are these issues? One thing I will point out is that in terms of data recovery, we have a very different landscape for data recovery for SSDs. For hard disk drives, there are shops that can literally take the drives apart and the platters apart, put them back together, and you can recover their data as long as the physical object isn't damaged, but something mechanically goes wrong on the outside or what have you. It's a very reliable process of recovering data from these physical objects. With the little chips, the data recovery can be a little bit harder, and we're still developing tools and techniques that really allow us to be as effective as we are with hard disk drives. So let's talk a little bit about RAIDs. And I got a whole section of what a RAID is and what that word means and how they work. I just want to plop this here really quick just to give you a contrast of our standard hard drives. RAIDs are very scalable objects, so they allow us to build on what we start with and build up from there so that they can expand in size over time. They have built-in redundancy, which helps protect our data and in some cases our power and our network connections for them, and their ability to provide data to anybody who is authorized to use the device, be it in a single home office situation or an office service. The RAID is built to be to serve data in a demanding workspace. Some of the cons of RAIDs are costs. They're not cheap. They can get up into the tens of thousands of dollars, depending on what you're looking for. There are great inexpensive options as well, but this cost can scale really quickly. Oftentimes they're rather big and bulky, so size is a consideration. So like it's not something you're going to shuttle around with. It's something that you want to plug in and leave somewhere. Oftentimes you have connectivity issues. I just ran into a situation where we had an old RAID from a company that's gone chapter 11, and it's using an older Thunderbolt type, and that older Thunderbolt type isn't compatible with the new Thunderbolt type. So we had to go through a whole other rigmarole to get the data off of it. And they can become complex depending on the manufacturer and the software that runs it. There are some complexities, and sometimes in that case, you might need to work with an IT professional to help get things set up. Even though there's some very simple, more direct-to-consumer products, it can grow in complexity really quickly. All right, so let's talk. And like I said, I'm going to come around to RAIDs again, and we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about them. But let's talk really quick about connection types, because when we have data and we have on a device, we need to connect it to our computer so our computer can interact with it. The things that most people are familiar with are USB and Thunderbolt. Those are sort of the words that you'll hear mostly in terms of connecting an external peripheral or an external device. I don't really want to talk about PCI or SATA, SCSI, M.2. There's a whole world of technology and how you plug in different devices. For most of us, when we're looking at an external hard drive, it's going to be on typically a Thunderbolt or a USB device. And I like to throw this graphic up here just to give you a sense of the world of connections. Believe me, I got a drawer of almost every known type of adapter in my drawers behind me here, because we've evolved through so many different types of physical connections. Right now, we're at something called a Type-C or USB-C. But most of these are these physical connections that we are able to plug into our computer so that we can move the data around. I want to show you this graphic, and I don't want to go into the rabbit hole of the reasons why these different speeds are different speeds. It's just to show you a relative sense of where we've come from. With our first generations of USB, the square A style plugs, they were terribly slow. And we are now getting up to USB Gen 4 and Thunderbolt 4. We're getting up to 40 gigabits per second and going up to 80 gigabits pretty soon, all using the Type-C connector, right? This new oval connector that we have. The point is when you're thinking about scalability and performance and availability, you got to think about the speed that this thing is going to connect through. And the more data you have on the device, and you could have a very fast device and a very fast computer, but if they're connected with a very slow speed cable, you're going to be very frustrated, and it's going to be not a fun experience to work with that stuff. So you want to think about, how am I going to connect this device, and what's the relative speed? And fortunately, these days we're getting much faster speeds just out of the box with a lot of these devices. One of these takeaway points that, if you get anything from this presentation today, one thing I do want you to remember is that Type-C USB connection, Type-C, it's not a USB connection per se. It's a physical. It's describing the physical connection. And the Type-C connection can run different protocols on top of it. It can run video, it can run audio, it can deliver power, and it can deliver data connection like Thunderbolt or the USB standards. So USB-C is a great device because it can do a whole different things, and that's a whole different presentation. But remember that I prefer to say Type-C rather than USB-C. All right, so let's talk about, now that we've kind of thought about connectivity type, let's think about a couple of words that you might hear kicked around. You might hear a NAS, NAS, network attached storage. And less often you hear DAS, DAS, directly attached storage. So what's the difference between those two? Because it's a little bit, it's helpful to keep this in mind when you're looking at products. A directly attached storage is something that's usually directly connected to your computer, and it doesn't have its own operating system, and it can't necessarily be shared with other computers if you are on a network, unless that computer has explicitly made that a sharing object. So this is a DAS, is typically that little 4 terabyte Western Digital hard drive that we might have, or an SSD or a thumb drive. Those are all examples of a DAS. That is something that's directly attached to your computer. And a NAS is a network attached storage device, something that's very different in terms of its connectivity, not necessarily with what's inside and it's holding data, but how computers would access that. So a network attached storage device plugs into a network, be it a home network or an office network. And what it does is it allows for multiple users to access the data on that device all at the same time. And typically it only connects to a network. So it doesn't have a direct computer network to it. Or if it does, then it's a limited purpose thing, but it's not a daily use kind of thing. And typically it has its own operating system, some piece of software. So it's like a computer that has a whole bunch of hard drives in it. And that computer is able to serve all the information out over the network. And a lot of times you'll hear a RAID device, which we're about to start talking about, compared to a NAS. They are not the same thing. A NAS is a network attached device. A printer could be a NAS. A scanner could be a NAS. It's just something that's attached to a network that allows multiple people to access it simultaneously. All right. Does this look familiar to anyone? I hope not. If it is, give me a call. We'll talk. One of the problems that we have with needing a lot of data storage and in a lot of different kinds of storage is that we've got to cobble together a whole bunch of systems. And you can see all of these examples are, people who've tried to solve this one problem in a lot of different ways. So this brings up the question of a RAID. What is a RAID? A RAID is a redundant array of independent disks, RAID. And like I said before, a RAID is not a NAS. There are two different terminologies. Can a RAID be a NAS? Yes, and we'll talk about that in a second. But something else I kind of want to debunk a little bit, is RAID a backup? No, RAID is not backup. It is storage. Backup is an additional copy of the data that is not being accessed on a daily basis. It's somewhere, break glass in case of emergency type of data. And so a RAID is not backup in a defined term. What a RAID is capacity and redundancy. And those are very important concepts, and we're going to talk even more about it now. So going back just really quickly, see all of this capacity? This is a lot of hard drives, and somebody's trying to make sense of them. What a RAID does is it allows us to expand our total amount of storage beyond the constraints of an individual hard drive. Individual hard drives are really limited to under 20 terabytes of data. There's a physical limitation given the size that we have of our devices and the devices that we can work and the efficiencies that we can get from the technology. We can only get so far. So if we want to create a 50 terabyte or 100 terabyte storage solution, we have to cobble together multiple hard drives. But as we saw in the previous photo, there's a lot that gets messy in terms of data connection. So a RAID brings the data connection into a single point of connection along with a single power supply. So it gets rid of all that spaghetti and all that mess. Now, one of the things that happens is as we increase the number of hard drives that we're working with, we're adding complexity. And as we add complexity, we increase the potential for fault and corruption. And so what we've done to fix for that is not only does the operating system in the RAID have tools to keep an eye on all of that data, we can actually do something that's called data striping, where multiple drives in an array, in a box, can have copies of the data of other hard drives on it spread out so that if any one hard drive fails, mechanically speaking, we can pull that drive out, put in a new one, and the system can repopulate the system as if no drive had gone missing. And we'll talk a little bit about that more in just a moment. So as we increase our storage size needs, we need to add extra devices, and we got to bring those devices into a a coherent whole that doesn't have 15 different power supplies and multiple data connections. And then as we use all of that data storage, we have to be careful that that data stays organized and clean and doesn't sort of come apart at, it doesn't fray at the edges. And so a RAID brings all of that together. So the advantages of a RAID are expanded capacity, single data and power connectivities, redundancy. We can pull a drive out and put it in. Scalability, we can pull a drive out and put a bigger one in, and so we can replace our system over time and make it bigger if we want. It's available. It has its own power supply. It has a data. It has a very smart operating system usually, so it can stay on for a long time, doesn't need to be rebooted a lot. And then we have this very important consideration, which is fault tolerance. If some of the data goes bad on there are self-healing tools built into the system that can correct that data and keep that data constantly fresh, I guess you could say. It doesn't go rotten. I don't know. That's a weird way to think about data, but anyway, we'll go with it. All right. So let's clarify. Like I mentioned this before already. Can a RAID be a NAS? Yes. You can have something like Synology or QNAP or Western Digital MyClouds that are available on a network. And they can be available to multiple users. They can be available even onto the internet. Can a RAID be a DAS? Yes, it can. OWC, Glyph, GTech, these are all companies that make RAID systems. It's got multiple hard drives in it that plug into a computer directly. And in some cases, you may want a NAS, a RAID that is a NAS, and in some cases, you may want a RAID that is a DAS. And you have to think about those initial questions. What am I using this for? Who needs to use it? How much data do I need to answer the question? Because you don't want to go spend several $1,000s and then realize you got a NAS and you really wanted a DAS. All right. So let's talk a little bit about what a RAID does, how it does what it does. It's basically magic. For you and me, for the average user, it's just magic. If you're curious to how the magic works a little bit, the technical terms are data striping with parity. And sometimes parity is called checksum, and they're slightly synonymous terms. And if you look at this diagram and you're like, what is going on here? I don't know. What this is 4 hard drives. And the data that you put onto the RAID system is broken up into 4 different chunks, 4 times 4 in this case. And a piece of the data is put on all the different drives, A1, A2, A3, A4. And we have this thing called parity, and this is a mathematical thing. We can count the number of ones and zeros on a hard drive, and then we can say, okay, well, how is that total number even or odd? And then we can reference that as a 1 or a 0. So now we know something about the data that we're storing. It's really crazy, but it's very cool. And what it does, the magic that it does, is it allows for one of these mechanical hard drives to fail, even if it's an SSD or a spinning hard drive. If that drive, for whatever reason, fails physically, we can pull it out and put a new one in, and the other hard drives, they all have pieces of each other, and we have this parity thing, so we can replicate the data back onto that missing drive. So any one drive, or in some cases 2 drives, can fail in a system, and we lose none of our data. Whereas if I've got one hard drive, one hard drive, one hard drive, and I've got them all 3 plugged into my computer, and I've got 3 different sets of data there, if one of those hard drives fails and I don't have any other backup solution, that's it. That data is gone. Whereas a RAID allows for this bits of the data to be spread across multiple drives and to be protected in that way. So, like I said, it's magic, but it's amazing magic. I love it. If you are going to get into a RAID, it's helpful to understand a couple of terms. You don't have to remember the technical terms, but just think about the function that these different methods or levels of RAID, they're technically called levels, what they do. So we have something called JBOD, JBOD, just a bunch of disks, basically, is what that means. And it just takes all, say you have 4 10 terabyte hard drives in a box, you have 40 terabytes in JBOD mode, you have 40 terabytes of data. You just use all of it. But if one of those drives fails, in this circumstance, you lose all your data. The whole system goes down. So there's no redundancy in a JBOD system. A RAID 0 system is same thing. It's striping the data, but it doesn't have any checksum. It doesn't have any way for error correction. It's a much faster system, but it has no error correction in it. So we don't want to, in most cases, we don't want a RAID 0. RAID 1 is one of my favorite RAIDs, and I put a lot of RAID 1s in with clients. Typically, it's a single box, 2 hard drives, and the 2 hard drives are exact mirrors of each other. So it's got, say, 2, I work with a nonprofit here. It's a photography school where I live here in Vermont. We're just putting in a new drive system for the students to use. And it's 2 8 terabyte hard drives that are exact mirrors of each other. So if one of those hard drives fails, then the other one is there. We don't need more than 8 terabytes. That's way more data than what we need. So we've got plenty of headroom. So I built for scale, and I've built for redundancy so that if one of those drives fails, then we still have the data as backup. So RAID 1 is great, especially for somebody who's got a basic setup at home, who has pretty simple needs. RAID 1s are great systems. RAID 5 is where the magic happens in the RAID systems. And that is where it goes back to this diagram that I showed you, where we have the parity, where we have the magic thing, where if a drive fails, you can swap it out. RAID 5 is what you want to go for if you're looking at buying yourself a RAID system. And that has the striping and the parity. So it has the putting the data all off on all the multiple hard drives, and then the fault tolerance, or the thing that makes sure that all the data is clean and replaceable. And you can see here on the minimum disks needed. So if you're going to buy a RAID 5 system, you need at least 3 drives, and figure that a chunk of the total storage that you have is going to be reserved for this fail-safe data. So if you have 4 10 terabyte drives, you don't have 40 terabytes, you have around 30 terabytes, because a certain amount of that data has to be reserved across the system for this backup protection data. If you end up going Synology, which is a very popular brand of NAS RAID, so a network attached, Synology only makes network attached storage devices. They have a system called SHR, Synology Hybrid RAID, I think is their thing. And you want to use their RAID level for their system. One of the things that Synologies are great for is it allows you to upgrade the drive to a larger size. So if you had to swap out a drive, you could put in a bigger drive, and so you could build your system back up over time without doing any extra work. It's really great. Right. So that's a lot of technical mumbo jumbo. And I know, again, if you've got questions, make sure you answer them. And we're going to hopefully have enough time at the end for a good question and answer session. If you take anything away from this particular diagram, don't think about the RAID levels or the RAID 1 or RAID 5 or whatever. Think about, is this data mirrored, or is this data replaceable if a drive fails? Those are really the only 2 principles that you need to remember from this slide. Is, if one drive fails, is the other one got up the data? Or if I have multiple drives, can I pull one out and replace it with another drive to cover up that gap? All right, let's talk about a couple of cautionary tales. There was a great company that was around for a long time called Drobo. They really marketed to photographers. I have a lot of friends and clients who had Drobo systems. They're chapter 11. They're gone. Technology, pandemic, just whatever, modern capitalism, they're gone. They are no longer able to support their products. And if you have a Drobo, I would suggest you make sure you get your data migrated off onto a new system of some kind. It's a real bummer because they were a great company, and from an end user standpoint, and a lot of us really related to their products. They built very human oriented products. They took the technology and made it really simple and great. One of the issues that I had with a client who had a Drobo, they had a Thunderbolt 2 connection Drobo. It's not compatible with Thunderbolt 4, and we've got a new Thunderbolt 4 computer for them. And so we had to go transferring data in across a network, and that was a real pain. So always be thinking about, okay, if I put all my eggs into this one basket, what am I going to do if that company goes chapter 11, or in 5 or 6 or 7 years, when whatever data connection that we're running now is no longer the fancy connection that we're all using? And is that going to be backwards compatible? The new stuff is going to be backwards compatible to the old stuff. So we want to be careful, and we want to be thinking, about rolling our data forward. Look, if I've just got a couple of terabytes of photos, no big deal. Easy peasy. Copy it across to a new hard drive, buy a new hard drive every 3-4 years, something like that. No problem. Some new connection comes out, great, easy. But if you've got hundreds of terabytes of data, that's a lot of data. Maybe tens of terabytes of data. You really want to be thinking and planning for the future and paying attention to what's going on so that you can move forward. And one last cautionary tale. I used to be a really big proponent of using Synologies for network backups. I have a couple of clients, all Mac-based, home office or small office things. And like, great, we'll use the Synology for our time machine backup. That was really great at the time. I don't like it so much anymore. Don't do that. If you've got time machine needs or Windows backup needs, get another piece of software running that on a local hard drive. That would be my professional recommendation. So just a couple of cautionary tales. You can have all this great technology and all these cool devices, but remember, human companies can go out of business. Technologies can be not backward compatible, and how you designed something 5 years ago may not be the best way to use it again, in 6-7 years coming. And that's kind of an unfortunate thing, in that we have to stay up with all the technology. And that's just part and parcel of what we've got to work with in the digital photography space. I mean, for me, coming as a digital photographer, we've got to be on top of this kind of stuff. And that's one of the things that I end up doing a lot, is helping my clients moving forward with this kind of information. Okay, so that was a lot of stuff, a lot of information, a lot of technology. So let's look at some real world examples of different setups that you could possibly have. Let me just check the chat messages here. I see a couple of things. Okay, great. So real world examples. So here is a very basic system for someone who has pretty straightforward needs. Say, maybe you're a part-time pro photographer, or you're just a really strong enthusiast, hobbyist photographer, or photography is really important to you. This is how I would have you set up in a basic system. You'd have your computer. You would have some sort of backup drive that would back up your operating system. So if you're a Windows or a Mac user, we've got backup systems for those, because you want to be able to, if your computer, something happens to your computer, we want to be able to take that data in your operating system and get you started with a new computer right away. So it's always good to have some sort of system backup. And then for your data, for your photos themselves, the thing that's important for you, I'd go with a RAID 1 direct attached storage. So RAID 1, remember, is the mirror. So like a G-Tech or an OWC, something like that connects with a USB or a Thunderbolt connection that has 2 hard drives inside it. And the 2 hard drives can be anywhere from, 4 to 12 terabytes, and even larger if we needed. But in most cases, I would say 8 to 10 terabytes would be plenty. So 2 8-terabyte hard drives in there that are set up as a mirror. So if one of those hard drives fails, then there's another one backing it up. And then I would recommend that you have an offsite cloud backup that's also backing up your direct attached storage. My professional recommendation is Backblaze. That's another presentation altogether. But whatever your cloud storage solution is, the idea is you want a third copy of your data offsite somewhere else, not in the same physical space as your primary working copy and your first initial backup. So let's take a look here at the next slide. This is my setup. This is how I have things set up, and it's broken out a little bit more. I'll try to explain it. Hopefully this makes some visual sense. So I've got my computer, and I have two systems plugged into my computer for storage. I have something from the OWC, which is a company that sells a lot of technology. It's called the Mini Stack STX. I don't know why they called it that. It's crazy. And I have a Synology that's plugged into my little home network. And that has, I'll talk about that first. That has 6 hard drives that are total of space of 50 terabytes for me to use. I have it as a single volume. You can do all kinds of fancy stuff. And then I use it for cloud replication. I've got Dropbox and Google syncing to it. I even have clients that have Synologies, and I'm replicating their data on my side so I can work on their data locally, and it can sync back to theirs because Synologies can talk to each other across the internet. I've got my personal as well as my clients' photos on there. I even use it to back up my Lightroom cloud. So, I don't want to get too far down the Lightroom track, but Lightroom has 2 products. Adobe has 2 products, both called Lightroom. One of them uses the cloud. I use that as a phone backup because Lightroom Mobile can back up my phone, which goes to their cloud, and then the Lightroom cloud can download to a physical device somewhere. So I've got all of my iPhone photos on there. That is being backed up by Backblaze, their B2 service. So they classify service in a different way. Direct attached storage devices have a different pricing from network attached storage prices. So you have to have 2 different classifications of accounts. So this cool product that I have from OWC, which I really like, is actually 2 hard drives in one. It has a spinning hard drive in it and an SSD all in one box. It's really cool. And I've got that partitioned up in a couple of different ways. I've got 6 terabytes of working data. I've got a 4 terabyte time machine backup running in there. That's all on the HDD side. And for the SSD side, I've got a little scratch drive for things like Photoshop and some other editing programs. And then I've got about 1.5 terabytes for my Lightroom catalogs. I've got a whole bunch of different catalogs. They're on SSDs, makes them really fast. It's on a Thunderbolt 4 connection. So for me, what the mini stack does is it takes what it would be 4 different physical hard drives, puts them in one box, and gives me one data connection on a Thunderbolt 4. So it cleaned up a whole lot of mess for me, and I really appreciate this product because I literally had 4 hard drives plugged in before. All right, and then that's also being backed up to the Backblaze system. So let's talk about my client Olivia. And Olivia exists both in New York and in Rhode Island. And they have 2 Synologies, one in both places. And they actually work with an IT company that manages their computers and their networks for their homes and stuff. And they've set it up that their 2 Synologies can sync and replicate with each other. And then they have 2 PCs, or they have 2 computers in both places. So they don't travel with one computer going between the 2 places. And just a really quick side note. I've been working in this space for over a decade now. And people will say, well, why do they do it that way? Why don't they just have a laptop? Or why don't they, No 2 photographers that I've ever worked with work exactly the same way. Everybody has different personal circumstances, different workflows, different ways that they relate to and approach technology. And so for me, as a technical support specialist, I need to work towards you. What are your needs? So in this case, Olivia's needs are, I don't want to carry a computer. I just want to show up where I want to show up and sit down and work. I want my data to be in both places. Cool. Synology can sync and replicate each other. It's connected to the home network, so multiple computers can access it within their homes. Lightroom catalogs don't work off of a network. The data can be on a network, but the catalog, the brain file, the card catalog has to be on a directly attached storage device or internal in the computer. So what Olivia chooses to do is have a little Samsung T5 2 terabyte SSD, throw it in their bag when they go, and then plug it in when they get to Rhode Island. And when they come back to New York, they plug it in over there. And that has the catalog, and that's also being backed up through some of their backup systems. So that's one way you can set up. Synologies can replicate, in this case, using a small portable SSD to shuttle key data between the two computers. All right, next, we've got Emma, and a similar situation, spending time in Connecticut, spending time in New York, travels with their MacBook Pro, does a lot of traveling. And so when they're traveling, they have a MacBook Air. That should be not a MacBook Pro, but a MacBook Air with a little mobile storage drive and their camera, because they love to do photography. And so when they go traveling, they bring that little SSD back, plug it into the laptop, and then we work in Lightroom in getting the data out to different places. Pretty robust setups at home and at their pied-à-terre. We have two Synologies replicating each other with the photos, so the physical photo files are available in both places. We're using a CalDigit as a great dock. I love those guys. And they have individual time machine drives in both locations that are backing up the MacBook Pro. And it's the MacBook Pro that's shuttling between these two different remote connections or remote offices from each other. And the last one we'll look at is Lucas. Lucas is between Maine and Florida. Similar thing, CalDigits, separate monitors, but travels with a MacBook Pro, has a mobile drive and has a backup mobile drive, does a lot of photography, does a lot of traveling. So they make a copy in the field of the photos that they're taking on the fly using Carbon Copy Cloner. And then they have one OWC Gemini X2. It's a brand new product. It's an 8 terabyte RAID set up as a mirror. And when Lucas is in Florida, he has it with him there. And when he goes to Maine, he just takes that Gemini with him and plunks it down and plugs it in Maine. So moving the data that way. Now, I know that these three examples are all very interesting because they're people in multiple locations, but I wanted to use these examples to be able to explain a little bit of how you can use these systems in more and more complex ways, but in each different configuration, we have to sort of adapt ourselves to how is the data getting across and what backup systems do we have to have in place and how are we managing it? So if we go back to the first example, pretty straightforward, one computer, couple of connections and a cloud backup, easy to go. But then we can get really complex where we've got data replicating and laptops moving around, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that illuminates some of the principles that were involved in the presentation with all this information. So I think I'm done there. I'll stop the share. And Derek, if you want to come back in, somebody stop the share, stop share. There we go. You there? How was that?
That was awesome.
Okay.
That's one that I'm gonna have to bookmark and come back to. Some great information in there, but it's like there's only limited storage space up here.
Exactly.
But we'll go right into the questions, Dave. We have some good questions coming in. How often should I swap out old drives with a RAID? With a RAID, can I replace individual drives at different times, or is it replacing the entire system all at once?
Yeah, good question. So about the RAID thing, you can, depending on the manufacturer, and I want to be careful because different manufacturers have different criteria. But for example, if you have a Synology, the Synology will allow you to swap out a drive without powering the unit down, and you can replace that drive with the same size or bigger with no loss of data and no loss of service. So my drive is actually hand-me-down from one of my clients. and the thing got beat up and kicked around and shipped. And so I had multiple hard drives fail over time, and I was able just to swap them out one at a time as they go. In terms of longevity, that's the other nice thing about a good RAID manufacturer is that system's going to be able to monitor those drives. So if one of those drives starts to wobble, it's going to send you a warning. And when you get that warning, then you can go, okay, great, time to replace that one drive. And you can replace just that one drive and leave that box there. That's another great thing about Synology is they're constantly updating the operating system that runs their system. And it's very easy to keep this device. I can foresee keeping this device for 10 to 15 years easily.
Wow.
Yeah, and just keep swapping those drives when it's required. I don't need to swap it until the system says, hey, this one's going a little wonky. In terms of your home drive, say you've just got one little portable Seagate or Western Digital, something like that, I would be thinking about replacing that. I would first make sure that there's some sort of backup to that, either physically with you there or in the cloud somewhere. And then I would probably be thinking about replacing that between a 4 and 6 year time frame, especially if it's a spinning hard drive. SSDs, we're still not sure, but 4 to 6 is not a bad. Yeah, 4 to 6 is not a bad rule of thumb. And you know, in a lot of cases, if it's a little bit, if it's 4 or 6 years old, it may not be as big as the one that you have now. So, you know, in some cases it behooves you to go ahead, or you see a great deal. Like there's this one that B&H has got right now, the Samsung T7, like that's a steal, $300 for 4 terabytes.
Yeah, that is.
You know, and then you might go, oh, well, I might as well just jump on that right now and get all my data moved over, even though my drives are only 2 years old, something like that. But yeah, if something's pushing 6 or 8 years old, I'd be thinking about migrating the data for sure.
Let me ask you, what are people doing, David? I mean, look, older generations, it was great. We had photo albums, and
That's right. Yeah.
those will last hundreds of
A
years.
long time. Yeah.
What are people doing now? Like I was just thinking about the other day. I'm like, am I just gonna really have to go through and start making photo books? Because once you get up
Yep.
into, we're getting now where it's not only just photographers that are gonna have everything up. I have people who are just avid photo takers, let's call them, or
Yeah.
hobbyists who are
Right.
like, now our camera rolls are getting way up there. Our phones aren't holding it. And I have people who
Getting
are like,
crazy.
well, what do I do? I'm starting to outrun my storage. But for people like me, where it's like my hard drives are just stacked, is there
Yeah.
any long term, or is it like, am I just gonna have to catalog and hey, okay, it's every 5, 10 years, I'm gonna have to go through, make sure they still run? And is there any real long-term solution that is shaping
No,
up?
there's not. And that's interestingly enough, kind of what is the explosion that is the photo managers organization, because suddenly people like you either have a challenging need like that, and then you end up falling into, and you go, hey, I'm pretty good at this, and this is kind of fun. And so you start working on it. Or you have a relative who says, hey, we've got all of our family photo books. What are we going to do with them? They're starting to fall apart. The glue, you know, the plastic stuff is starting to yellow. How are we going to manage for that? And so that's really what's great about the photo managers, is that we are a professional body that can self-certify and hold standards and train people. We have a great community, so we're sort of lifting everybody up and solving all of these really difficult problems. I have a client, we scanned 15,000 of their family photos in boxes and in albums. And now we've got to go through the hard process of deduping and cleaning and organizing and you know, storing all of those. Great company in Brooklyn called Digify, you know, give them a big shout out. Worked with them a number of times. There's other companies that do this. That do the scanning. And then in the photo managers world, there's a whole bunch of people that's all they do, is they specialize in scanning or using SLR look downs that, you know, are taking pictures of this stuff. So what you asked is a really salient question, and it has a multiple different answers or things that we have to think about. But this idea of where are we going to store our data is not going to go away. And even Apple put out an iPhone ad, like, you know, showing like, hey, you know, the photos were talking to the person, like, don't delete me. And we're like, oh my God, right? You know, where are we going to store all this stuff? And that's again where there's a professional organization that can help with that kind of stuff. But yes, all of us are going to be being burdened with this question of what do we do with our physical artifacts and where do we store them and how do we manage for them. One of the things that I know a lot of people do is they digitally get those photos digitally scanned and then turn around and reproduce a physical book because that technology is durable, right? You put it on the coffee table, the kids come over, the grandkids come over, you can pick it up and look at it. You don't have to boot up nothing and software
Never goes
update.
out of style.
Yeah, right. What's my password? Yeah, so a lot of people are doing that is they're getting them digitally preserved, but then turning around and creating a new physical artifact that is because old photo albums are going bad, right? The acetate, the glue. My dad had them all all the slides rubber banded, and when I got the box, a lot of the rubber bands had disintegrated and burst, and the slides were all over the place.
And
yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
getting them digitally taken care of and then turning around and looking at what your physical options are for reproduction and accessibility. So
it's a nice shameless plug for the photo managers
it
that
totally is.
it's not a one size fits all kind of thing. It's kind of something, it's similar to photographers. Now we're getting into seeing a lot more mentoring versus going on YouTube or taking workshops. Now you're starting to see like this catered response. And I think that's kind of what's great about the photo managers is there's so many people out there to say, okay, well, it's not one size fits all. This particular thing would fit you for what you're doing, but this would fit somebody else. So really great to see that. I'm going to sneak one more question, if I may, from Visual Modulations joining us on YouTube. Can the on-site backup just be skipped and just rely on cloud storage for backups?
Yes, but like anything, it's going to have risks, right? Yes, you can skip the on-site backup, but what if the internet goes down? What if that company is bought? What if that company, I used to participate with a company called Demotics, which was a photojournalist freelancer wire thing out in the world, and anybody could file stories from all over the place. It was an amazing service. They got acquired, and then that company that acquired them was acquired, and then it was acquired yet again, and now that site and all that work is gone, swallowed up by some giant holding company who knows where. Is Google going to go out of business anytime soon? Probably not. Amazon? Probably not. But you're now putting your data in the hands of somebody else on and accessibility across wires that you don't have any control over. So yeah, you could skip the on-site backup, but if something happens, that's, you're putting yourself in a little bit of a jeopardy there. So me personally, I like to make sure that I have my data with me as much as I am relying on the cloud systems as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. And like you pointed out during your presentation, where it's like you don't know what future technology is going to bring and when something's going to be outdated and you're not going to be able to access something, or who knows, they might start charging $200 a month for that same cloud storage that's $9.99 a year right now. So options. Well,
yeah, and like I said, you can pick three, right?
Yeah, right.
Cheap, fast, or good. Pick two.
Yeah, you got to live with your decision. It's like, look, if you're gonna go cheap, you got to live with the consequences or the risks, I should say. The risk is always there, but
that's right.
Don't be a me. Don't raid zero. I learned that lesson the hard
Don't
way.
raid zero. Do not.
When you pulled up the raid chart,
yeah.
I'm over here and I'm like, even though my camera's not on, I'm getting embarrassed. I'm like, oh my god, can I just one day stop being reminded of my mistake?
Never. And then hopefully that's, we use our mistakes to improve ourselves and to warn, to be a help for other people. I have, for all of the mistakes that my clients come, they're like chagrined. Oh, I can't, this or that. I'm like, don't worry. I've done 10 times worse. That's why I'm in the business.
Exactly. That's why I'm here taking notes instead of, I'm like, when we have the photo managers on, guys, I have to be able to sit here and be able to listen because I need this more than anyone.
And that's, I have to say, I'd been doing this for a long time. I recently discovered the photo managers and I was like, oh my God. And it's just been one of the most supportive, welcoming, positive communities that I've ever interacted with, especially in a professional setting where people are just constantly lifting each other up and helping each other. We've got an internal Facebook group that spans the whole world. People are asking questions, getting help, throwing out free resources, all so that we can turn around and work with people like you and people like that are on this YouTube to say, this technology is insurmountable at times, right? The amount of software firmware updates and
Oh
passwords
yeah,
and all this stuff that we have to manage. There's no way that you should be expected to deal with it yourselves, and that's why there's a whole cadre of people that are coming up and getting involved. Everything from preserving the old memories to, helping you install your operating systems and printing new books and, deduping your catalogs. It's a huge amount of space, but we know that the need is there because the demand, right? There's a demand in the
definitely.
marketplace. So
Definitely. I love it. Huge thank you to the photo managers, Kathy, who's not with us today, but she's always
hi,
with us in
Kathy.
spirit. Look, you guys are all passionate. Everybody that we have on, it's like you guys love what you do. You love helping people. The community has
Yeah.
been represented so well by just the people that we've had on so far for our photo managers program. So huge thank you to David, the rest of the photo
Thank you.
managers team out there, and to all the viewers out there. Learn from other people's mistakes. Don't make your own. If you do, it
Call a
happens.
photo
But
manager.
yeah, yeah, there we go. Get the photo managers, get them on call. It's like you guys are gonna be like the Ghostbusters. We're gonna have
Yeah,
to get
for
like a
reals.
jingle for you. Huge thank you again to the entire photo managers team, to everybody out there. It's all we got in the books for you now. Another edition of the B&H virtual event space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.